George and Amanda had been living together for 5 years, but this was the first time they were experiencing a housing issue. This was primarily due to the fact that the company in which George worked filed for bankruptcy, as a result of which he lost his job. At first glance, it did not seem like such a big deal. However, it meant that George needed to find a new place for them to live. "Don't worry, dear, everything will work out," Amanda said, trying to support her husband. George lowered his eyes guiltily and tried pulling himself together. The young man wanted to hide his money problems, especially since it wasn't his fault. A big issue was that George and Amanda's landlord raised the rent by 1.5 times for absolutely no reason. This was a huge hit for the struggling young family, and it was very difficult to recover from. They managed to scrape enough money to pay rent for 1 more month, but they needed to think hard in order to come up with a solution for the following month. The couple did not want to fall into despair, although there was little joy to be found in their predicament. During the years that Amanda and George spent living in their cozy rental house, they had gotten used to it and began seeing it as their sanctuary. Now, for reasons completely beyond their control, the couple had to look for something new. It is difficult to say how the situation would have unfolded if one day Amanda had not received a letter from the notary. The young woman opened the envelope, took out a sheet of paper with the official seals, after which she ran her eyes over what was written. To Amanda's sincere amazement, the official notice stated that she inherited a house in the countryside from her great-aunt, Charlotte. The young woman could not believe her eyes. She kept reading the letter over and over, but its content wasn't changing. God, this is a real gift from fate. I've seen Aunt Charlotte only a few times in my life, but it turned out that she left me a house, whispered Amanda. George was overjoyed upon learning about his wife's unexpected inheritance. The house could have become a real lifeline for them, which would prevent them from sinking into the abyss of despair and depression. Frankly, Amanda felt somewhat uneasy by the extravagant gift. This was because she could not attend Aunt Charlotte's funeral. At the time, she was in the middle of a long business trip that she needed to take in order to advance her training. And now, Amanda felt a certain amount of embarrassment and guilt for having missed it. On the other hand, she could not ignore her great-aunt's last wish and decided to accept the inheritance. Having received the house keys and all the relevant documentation at the notary office, Amanda and George set off for the country. The roads leading up to the house were horrible, which forced George to drive at the speed of a turtle crawling towards a treasured oasis. The house of the late Charlotte O'Donnell stood out from all the other houses by its impressive size. Many years ago, this house was part of a family estate belonging to Henry O'Donnell, a well-known landlord in the district. At the time of his death, his fortune was estimated at millions of dollars. However, this ended up being of little benefit to his descendants. Having squandered all the money, many of them ended up living below the poverty line. As a result, their family lost its former reputation. The paint on the walls was peeling, and the house's massive columns no longer looked as fancy as before. Since the late Charlotte O'Donnell had no children, it was hard for her to properly take care of the house due to her advanced age and many chronic diseases. "It certainly needs a lot of work," George said as he stopped the car at the gate. Of course, he was very grateful for the house. It was a real gift from fate, which at first seemed cruel, but later smiled upon the young couple. "That's all right, dear. We'll take it slow and do all the necessary repairs. We'll start with a few rooms and we'll eventually make it to the rest of the house," Amanda reassured her husband. After unlocking the front door, the young people cautiously crossed the threshold of the house. Amanda and George were instantly met with the damp smell of mold and poor ventilation. As the couple expected, the inside of the house was no better than the outside. The old-fashioned rooms were in urgent need of repairs and refurbishment. "I think we need to start by replacing the wallpaper in the living room and in the hall. We'll save up money and tackle the bathroom repairs next," Amanda frowned while thinking out loud. Not hearing his wife's remarks, George placed his palm on one of the walls. The sound it made was so loud that it felt as if he had slapped on an iron frame rather than a brick wall. "Wow, you can't tell from the outside, but it's built really well," George said with obvious admiration in his voice. Back in the day, they used to build structures to last centuries. That's why this house has been standing for so long. Amanda answered with a smile. Having outlined the approximate scope of work, the couple decided to start repairs the upcoming weekend. At first, they had to order all the necessary supplies and materials. Only then could they begin removing the old wallpaper and dismantling those parts of the house that had become unstable. But before starting the work, Amanda and George visited the cemetery where the late Charlotte O'Donnell was buried. Kneeling before the marble headstone, Amanda wept softly and said, "Thank you, Auntie. If it weren't for you, George and I would be having a very difficult time." At that moment, a slight breeze blew through Amanda's hair, which felt like her great-aunt's gentle touch. It felt so symbolic that Amanda treated it as a sign. After visiting the cemetery, the couple went to the home improvement store, where they spent all their money on an order. All that was left to do was wait until the weekend to get down to business. Time dragged on slowly, as if on purpose. The spouses were impatient to begin working on the house and improve its condition. As planned, the first thing George did was begin removing all the old wallpaper. It came off easily, as a result of which the couple worked quickly and enjoyed themselves. The old wallpaper peeled off almost immediately, as soon as it was slightly pried and pulled. It was only in the hall that the wallpaper was attached so strongly that the couple wondered whether the content of the glue used there could have been completely different. It was then that George first felt that something strange was going on. It was the exact same spot that he hit with his palm earlier to check the wall's strength. Something is clearly off here. Why does the wallpaper come off so easily in the other parts of the house? But here you have to use maximum effort in order to tear off even a square inch, the young man thought while wielding a special tool. At that moment, the blade of his construction spatula touched something metal, which made a loud noise. "What is it? Did you hit a nail?" Amanda exclaimed in surprise. George frowned and shook his head. What was in front of him was many times larger than a nail or even a metal rod. Having finally removed the wallpaper from that section of the wall, the young man gasped softly. In front of him was a steel safe which was built into the brickwork. Wow, a house with a secret. But where is the key for this iron giant? Amanda wondered, looking out from beyond her husband. George took a closer look, then carefully ran his hand along the wall. Soon his fingers found a small niche in which lay a massive key. "Now we're going to find out what secret this safe hides," George whispered excitedly. When he inserted the key into the keyhole and turned counterclockwise 2 times, there was a loud metallic click, after which the door opened smoothly. Holding their breath, the couple moved closer towards the safe. However, once they saw what was inside, they were both totally disappointed. The safe turned out to be almost completely empty. Only a small envelope, yellow from age, lay on one of the shelves. The envelope was covered in old-fashioned monograms. But when George put his hand deep into the safe, his hand felt something strange. Once he pulled it out, George almost fainted from shock. A human skull was looking at the couple with its empty eye sockets. Trembling with fear, George dropped the skull and, together with Amanda, rushed towards the exit. Never before in their lives had the couple experienced such terror. It took a lot of effort for them to catch their breath and convince themselves to go back inside. The skull had cracked open once it hit the floor. As a result, it became clear that it wasn't real, but rather a skillfully made replica from plaster. "Your ancestor is some jokester," George remarked with a chuckle. Amanda smiled back and glanced at her husband, and then at the letter inside the safe. The man gathered his courage and hurried to fulfill his wife's silent request. Carefully taking the envelope in his hands, George opened it and pulled out a notebook sheet folded in 4. However, the most important surprise awaited the couple once they unfolded the note and saw a miniature map. The detailed topographical map had one spot marked with the cross and circled in red. "I bet this was your deceased relative's hiding place," George exclaimed. Having difficulty restraining his excitement, he hurried towards the exit. The map led the couple to the backyard of the house. There, a sprawling elm tree was growing. Several branches were placed underneath it for people to sit on and relax. Having found a shovel in the barn, the young man began furiously digging the stone-like, dry soil. George had to keep digging for about 3 feet when the shovel finally hit an iron barrier. Kneeling down, the young man carefully lifted some ancient relic, which turned out to be an iron chest with a small lock and corroded hinges. Without thinking twice, George broke the rotten lock with one blow and resultantly opened the chest's lid. What was inside took the couple's breath away. The chest was filled with gold brooches, rings, and bracelets made of precious stones. Most likely, 100 years ago, the unforgettable Henry O'Donnell decided to play it safe and hide some of his wealth from the eyes of his many relatives. It is worth admiring the resoluteness of the man who did not reveal his secret even on his deathbed. "My great-grandfather knew how to surprise people, that's for sure," Amanda exclaimed. George nodded in agreement and carried the treasures inside. With the money they earned from selling the jewelry, the spouses not only carried out a complete renovation of the family estate, but they also opened a small company selling furniture. Moreover, George installed a granite obelisk on the grave of Henry O'Donnell, who, unknowingly, helped his relatives from the future. Since then, George and Amanda visit the graves of their relatives every Sunday and leave flowers. The couple intends to pass on this tradition not only to their children, but also to their grandchildren and even their great-grandchildren.